Boa tarde a todos. Eu vou falar em inglês, so I'll switch to English. I'm sure that I think I would speak in Portuguese, you will be able to understand, but I'll stay in English. So I would like to start by thanking Filippo for joining us, particularly because he's on a very tight schedule, and after being here with us, I know we will have to rush sort of to the airport. It's really a privilege for us to have him with us. This is going to be hopefully, at least I hope that's what you will also confirm by the end, but this was meant to be, and hopefully it will be a very brief and informal conversation, which tends to be totally aligned with the spirit of this moment that we are having here today, which is a get-together. That's how it was named, and it's meant to celebrate the effort that was put in practice by a lot of entities to organize in Portugal the World Investment Week. We believe it's always important to try to combine food for thought with food for stomach. So this time we'll have first the food for thought, and then there will be some food for the stomach after the conversation with Filippo. I probably should have started by that. Just some words to present Filippo, just very brief words before moving into the conversation. As far as his bio is concerned, I'll just say that he's a professor at financial markets and banking legislation at Bocconi University, and he also has many other academic positions. Apart from his academic background, he has also substantial professional experience accumulated in different companies, including listed companies, asset management and investment firms. Filippo masters 7, if I got it right, 7 different languages, and I'm sure that if you would stay a few more days in Portugal, there will be a native language to be added to the list. One final remark is also to say that Filippo also has a strong passion for music, and that is also the reason why he's also a professor of musicology at the University of Milão. I hope I said it right. It's right. So moving into the conversation, I'll just throw in there some introduction remarks, and then I will throw some questions to Filippo. As I said, this is meant to be an informal conversation. It will be so. But I would like to stress 2 ideas before throwing some questions to Filippo, so that he can share with us his views on some important topics that are related to retail investors, which are at the center of the World Investment Week. And the first idea I have to share is that capital markets, they cannot be seen as something that only relates to big companies and to institutional investors. Capital markets, they can and they should offer different and varied solutions to small companies and also to retail investors. And by doing so, they are in fact like a channel for the diversification of both risk and also funding. It also brings, by doing so, it also brings additional resilience to both investment portfolios and to companies' funding structures. And so I think that if we believe in what I've just said, and I hope that at least those who are here in this room believe it becomes quite an imperative that we work as actively as possible in order to make these advantages and the opportunities of capital markets better known and understood. The initiatives of the World Investor Week, which is what brought us together today in this, I would say, extraordinary setting, they clearly aim at promoting the awareness that I've just mentioned, and they try to do so by conveying important information and also key messages in a simple and in a clear manner. And this is one also of the reasons why the organization of the Investor is so relevant. This year, we were particularly focused on the importance both of saving and also the growing use of digitalization as far as the marketing and the promotion of financial products is concerned. So this is also one of the reasons why we've chosen the motto for the World Investor Week in Portugal, which was saving for the future, investing with innovation. If we think about the digitalization context and the need to save for retirement, which is something particularly acute in our country, I think it would be difficult to conclude that this combination of these two elements will require specific protection strategies and also a number of tools to do so. And this also points into one direction, which is the direction of promoting financial literacy. Supervisors, they have, and they will always have, a number of limits to what they can do. But financial literacy is really one important tool because it is the first line of defense. The second idea I would like to emphasize very briefly is that citizens, they must contribute more actively and responsibly also to help shaping what can be described as a more effective financial regulation. And they can do so by demanding quality services and also by providing suggestions to the financial markets legal framework. I think this is not an original purpose, and the European Commission is trying to put it into practice. Let's hope it's successful. At least that's what it's meant to be through the retail investment strategy. Let's see, sometimes things start with the good reasons behind it, but we never know when they reach the end whether the good reason materializes. I would like to hope that the World Investor Week works also as a call for action. I mean, not just for us here, but also to others who are involved in the design and the function of capital markets. And I'll stop here because I still have some other things to say after this conversation, but I'll stop here. But this was a kind of a way through to launch the conversation with Filippo. And I will move to that. As I said, I will throw some questions to Filippo, not a large number of questions, but hopefully something that will be the food for thought that I mentioned. And the first question I would like to ask is about whether or not we are going in the right direction with this retail investment proposal. And I would ask in particular whether you think this proposal, the rules, they will effectively promote a very important characteristic for investors, which is value for money.
So thank you again, and thank you really heartily for inviting me in this wonderful location and wonderful Lisbon. I've been actually here for the past 2 days for the conference at the Faculty of Law, and now this closing event is really amazing, looks really amazing. I think that we are finally understanding that the protection of retail investors, it's not just protecting them, but also trying to stimulate a higher level of involvement in capital markets due to a number of socio-economic factors that you see in all member states. We must help them to build a better future for themselves and for the following generations. And getting to know better how financial markets work is clearly now an important objective. We're trying to do that, however, in a context where legislation has grown impressively in relation to financial markets over the past 15 years. The financial crisis of 2008 was really a breaking point, a turning point, and after that we saw that in all areas of the markets, and inside capital markets you have quite different things, from investment funds to investment insurance products to prospectus regulation, and then to the insurance sector. After the financial crisis, we really see that there's been a wave of new European legislation which does not facilitate the access per se to financial markets by retail investors, because the result that we see in front of our eyes today is of legislation which is probably too complex and even too difficult to apply vis-à-vis retail investors. So the idea that we have to do something in that area to make it more user-friendly, to make it more understandable by retail investors is a very good idea that ultimately the European Commission picked up in the so-called retail investment strategy, which is just a small, it's a part of the Capital Markets Union project. There's a lot of stuff in the recent proposal by the Commission as to this retail investment strategy. Some of them go, in my opinion, in the right direction. Some of them might need to be revisited, but clearly the need to have not just a higher level of protection, but to build a market which is more user-friendly for retail investors there, and I think that's a good direction. That's good news.
Okay, that's good to know. I think that in the beginning, before the acronym RIS, standing for Retail Investment Strategy, it showed up Retail Investment Plan. But if you read it like that, the acronym is like rest in peace. So I hope that it doesn't translate into that. So another aspect, which is also another important aspect of this proposal, has to do with financial advice. There's a lot of discussion around inducements. It's a core topic, but given the title of our World Investor Week, I go into something different. I will throw in a different question, and the question is whether or not we should have rules on general advice on social media, because this is becoming a very relevant topic. So what are your views on that?
Well, the way in which we understand investment advice is based on a definition which is very old. It goes back to the Investment Services Directive of 1993, and it has never been changed. And it's a very narrow definition. It's narrow because investment advice under MiFID is an advice which is personalized, so it's sort of conveyed as being suitable for a specific individual investor, and also because it concerns a specific financial instrument or a transaction in a specific. This is very narrow because investors interact with financial advisors in different ways. They get all kinds of investment support, not necessarily investment advice under MiFID. And it's very difficult for a retail investor to understand whether this advice is under a regulatory landscape, because it's a MiFID investment service, and so falls under certain rules of protection, or whether it is not. The relationship of trust that a retail investor has with his advisor clearly disregards these aspects. He's looking at receiving some kind of support for taking his investment decisions, regardless of whether this support falls in a very granular way into the definition of MiFID or not. So, for instance, the very drastic alternative between investment advice, inducements, yes, no investment advice, inducement, no, is unfortunately flawed regardless of what you think about inducements, but it is flawed because what the kind of service that investors receive is not necessarily investment advice as defined under MiFID. So we should, in my opinion, revise the definition of investment advice, making it wider, extending the scope of MiFID protection, including naturally the investment advice, informal but very important, that circulates on social media, digital platforms, which is at the moment outside the scope of MiFID. It's surprising, but if an influencer goes on a social platform and gives an indication as to a possible investment, since the indication is not targeted to a single investor, it's not giving investment advice. But the world has changed, and after 30 years, my impression is that we really have to go back and revise that definition. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be many elements in the proposal of the Commission that go in that direction. They're still looking at the traditional investment advice MiFID definition, but we have to work on that, otherwise it will not be entirely satisfactory.
Okay, so moving now to another area, but of course linking also to investors, but turning more to companies and to their access to the market, which is something we would clearly like to see in much more bigger numbers, particularly in Portugal. And I'm saying this not just for protecting the jobs of supervisors, because we have plenty of things to do, but of course it would be much more happy with a lot of activity at the front, but also because I think all the supervisors, and I can say they also believe in the public will behind companies being listed and the power of the market. So having this in mind, one important thing to ask is whether, in your opinion, the public offering, the prospectus, the prospects are fit for purpose. Does anyone really read 100 pages, or sometimes even many multiples of 100 pages, apart from the supervisors themselves? What could be the alternative on this front?
Well, this is a very interesting question and also difficult to answer, but let me go back in time, in the 1980s, when, and sorry if I repeat something that some of you who were at the conference yesterday have already heard, but since the question is on that, I answer that question. Go back to the 1980s when the whole EU capital markets legislation was born. Right at the beginning, the first piece of legislation that we had was Prospectus Directive, listing and Prospectus Directive. And that was everything we had for quite a number of years. And then we had the UCITS Directive of 1985, which by the way has been probably the greatest success of Europe in trying to integrate capital markets. And then we had, after that, the ISD, and then the flow of upcoming legislation. Now, the idea of the prospectus in the 1980s was that when a financial product was placed on the market, investors would have a direct relationship with the issuer and would need to have a document as comprehensive as possible to explain the nature, characteristics, risk profile of that investment. But over time, the scenario has completely changed. We live today in a world of intermediation, financial intermediation, especially retail investors take most of their decisions through the support of investment advisors or by investing into products managed by professional managers such as investment funds. And so the prospectus is now targeting a character that is very far away from the issuer, because before you really reach the final investor that takes the investment decision, this passes through a series of intermediate steps where professionals are on the market and they perform their role. So the question is, why should we stick to an idea of prospectus that, especially on secondary markets, probably IPOs are different, because in IPOs you have a sort of a breaking point where the issue goes on the market. But apart from that, we should really think of having a different world. And also the Commission is supporting the idea that investment advice is fundamental for protection of retail investors. So if investment advice is fundamental, it means that you need more investment advisors that support investors in their decisions. And at that point, the prospectus becomes mostly irrelevant in this new landscape. But what is interesting is that there's been really a regulatory shift from the 1980s, when we had no rules on intermediaries in Europe, because till the ISD there were no rules on investment services. So the prospectus was really the only thing that we had in capital markets regulation. The situation now is completely different. I don't want to say that we can live without the prospectus, but surely we can think of living in a world where information is highly simplified the retail investor is synthetic, is essential, is really the core information that the investor must receive. And this, if I were to calculate a percentage, would probably amount to saying that 1% of current prospectuses would live in this new world, and 99% of the information which is in the current prospectus environment is probably not so useful. But I don't want to say that information is not useful. It is not the same situation that we had 40 years ago, because of intermediaries assisting investors in taking their investment decisions.
That's I think, a very thought-provoking thing. I'm sure that will keep in our minds and will generate a lot of discussions. You know, if this is, we always try to find the magic bullet to solve the problem. So I don't resist also confronting you with one question, which is, you know, if you could have just one decision, something that should be done to promote the access of companies to the market, what would be the number one thing you would recommend to do?
I would definitely leave more space to alternative trading venues vis-à-vis regulated markets. That's an area where I think we can be braver than what we have been in the future, because in MiFID we have the taxonomy of trading venues, as you well know, regulated markets, MTFs, but within the MTFs we have the growth markets for SMEs and other kinds of MTFs, and then we have the organized trading facilities, which are quite different animals. But an interesting thing that we see is that whereby regulated markets have now some kind of hard times in attracting new companies being listed there, and in some countries there is also quite an evident phenomenon of delisting from those markets. Alternative trading venues seem to be more interesting, and at the same time, if you compare how these alternative trading venues are structured and function across Europe, it's quite a diversified world. The rules are profoundly different. Sometimes you see that legislators gold-plate national legislation and apply to MTFs rules that are otherwise would be mandatory only for regulated markets. For instance, the takeover bid, in case of change of control. Under European law, the takeover bid is the takeover directive only applies to issuers which are listed on regulated markets. But in some countries, for instance in Spain and also in France, the legislator has extended these rules on a mandatory basis to MTF growth markets, which has sort of a mixed effect, because on the one side you may say, okay, investors that buy shares on those alternative trading venues are protected just as if they're protected in a regulated market, but at the same time it reduces the difference between regulated markets and MTFs and makes MTFs less interesting for issuers and ultimately probably also for investors. So we should leave more freedom and more creativeness in structuring these alternative trading venues that target basically small and medium enterprises. A study published by ESMA a couple of years ago tells us that roughly 70% of companies which are listed on European trading venues, 70% are SMEs. So we live in a world where the regulation that applies to listed companies looks basically at regulated markets and big companies that get listed there, but the reality of the market is changing, and we have to look more closely at the access of smaller and medium enterprises to these alternative trading venues by making them a little bit more user-friendly than we have done today.
Okay, opening the way to the market.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know we are approaching the end. I have two questions, hopefully very short one. One is unavoidable, and it's a very hot topic, and I think the temperature we are experiencing this month of October clearly illustrates that. This is one of those unavoidable questions, which is to have your view on the ESG financial framework, which is now overwhelming.
It's overwhelming.
I don't want to answer that.
Yeah, it's overwhelming, and we now live. Sometimes I feel I live in a binary world because either I speak or I hear people speaking about ESG or about digitalization. It seems to be so. But ESG is the big topic, and I just want to raise a question which doesn't have an answer yet. And the question is, how can financial regulation really support the protection of the planet? And that's an interesting question, and there is still very little evidence that we can build a strict connection between regulating ESG finance and reaching the ultimate goal of, for example, emissions reductions. There's a striking example that we sometimes forget about, and it's what's happened in MiFID I and in MiFID II with emission allowances being treated as financial instruments. It's quite a long story, but to cut it short, the idea there was that if we start treating emission allowances, which are something quite far away from the traditional notion of what is a financial product, but if we start treating them as financial products and we try to capture them in the MiFID framework, including trading venues, investment services, then the market of these emission allowances becomes more efficient. And this is true. This is undoubtedly true. But the question is, this enhanced efficiency of the market, does it really have an impact that we can measure on the reduction of emissions? That should be the ultimate goal of ESG finance. So we are pretty confident that the intermediate goal of incorporating ESG objectives in financial regulation, we can achieve that. But the question is, will that really be useful? And there is no evidence, not even in the area of emission allowances after more than probably 12 years, that these have been included progressively in the context of investment services. There is still no hard evidence that the ultimate result is achievable. So it's challenging, really challenging, and let's see.
And as some say, the planet is not sensitive to ESG, it's sensitive to carbon. So,
moreover, yes.
Anyway, one final question, one I can't resist to, and I've already said it to our professor of musicology, and I think one good way of finishing this conversation is what musical piece, if we can find one, would you choose to describe the state of the capital markets union? Something we haven't talked yet, but which is always present in the discussions around capital markets.
Well, it's difficult to answer, but I would say certainly something that is very far away from what we call the classical period of classical music. So, including Mozart and probably Beethoven, where harmony and melody were really the distinguishing point. I think we are closer to dodecaphony, to dissonance, because of quite an irrational tendency of continuously adding new legislation, new layers of legislation, and very rarely thinking of coordinating what we have in place. And so, whereby the final objectives are pretty clear, but there's a lot of underground noise that I think we should take care of, because otherwise we might lose our way. So I cannot really cite a specific piece, but it's more Schoenberg or Weber than Mozart or Beethoven. Absolutely hiding in.
Okay. Well, thank you. I was just again to ask you to say a round of applause for thank you once more for being here with us. I hope you can stay a few more minutes before you have to rush to the airport. I will just move to that table because I will say a few more brief words before, well, hopefully I can contain people according to